Good morning and welcome to another episode of What's Up with Mr. Beck. And today is Wednesday, May 6, 2020. Some things I want to talk about right away are Beck's Bucks, because I saw that some kids got their Beck's Bucks from the desk last time they did a pickup. So right now, it does not look like there's going to be a way to possibly cash in your Beck's Bucks. However, I would like for you to get your Beck's Bucks, and then at the start of next year, when we start school, if you wanted to stop in to fifth grade, say hi to Mr. Beck, I will have that first week of school, maybe the second week of school, I'll have the prizes set out so those new fifth graders can see the prizes that we have, and you guys can come and cash in. I do want my Beck's Bucks back because I do not want to print a million of them over again. And I also want you to get rewarded for all the work that you've done. So come see me at the beginning of next year. We'll make sure that happens. Okay, so I want to get right into it because the lesson's pretty long today. We'll get into good news. Hit it, Ethan.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some delicious Oreos. What's in my Oreos? Tell me something good? Is that what it says? Wait, come over here. Does it say tell me something good? I'm pretty sure that says tell me something good. Well, in that case, tell me something good. Tell me something good.
That was one of the most creative tell me something good or good news that I've seen in a while. That was great. I love that. That was super, super awesome. Okay, so good news. Starting with Jarek, it's almost my birthday. When's your birthday, Jarek? Let us know. Chase and his family got their Fight Aylin Fight t-shirts. Whoop, whoop. Actually, they got sweaters, and they're awesome. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate your support. Michaela, my brother, and I played on the trampoline. My family went for a drive, and we watched The Phantom of the Opera. One of my favorite musicals. I'm trying to think of a song to sing to you guys. Insolent fool, this brave young suitor, basking in my triumph. Flattering child, you shall know me. See why in shadows I hide. Look at your face in the mirror. Mr. Beck will shut up now. Okay? Love that musical. Love it, love it, love it. Okay. Coleman watched the Sonic movie. I think that's what you're trying to say there. And he got a new Apple Pencil. Jealous. I really want an Apple Pencil. Okay. Here's a picture of Amelia's birthday cake that she made herself. Very well done. Very impressive. Young culinary chef over here. And Alex got lots of news. My good news for today is that my kitten Shadow loves to ride my hoverboard. I got my hoverboard for Christmas like 4 years ago, so it's like an old model. Another piece of good news from him is, here's the video of that first. The cat is awesome. Go. And my good news, this was for his good news from yesterday. I went to Cuba Lake and caught some northern pike. At a safe distance, I was using flathead skinners. I went with my sister and my stepdad. We caught them because it's pike season, and the reason it is because the climate is right now. It's when they're most active. All right. So that was great good news. So today's episode of What's Up with Mr. Beck was not brought to you by Dengar. I did this because I want to see if somebody writes Dengar. Because if you do, man, you're going to lose some points for your team. It was not Dengar. Okay, so here's today's lesson. It's a long lesson, guys. The multiple choice questions are scattered throughout. Please make sure you're paying attention. Okay? Hit it. Good morning and welcome to Lesson 5, The Ancient Ones, the Anastasi. Okay. 1400 years ago, when Europeans were deep amidst the Dark Ages, a highly developed group of people lived in an area now called the Four Corners. This is where the corners of four states, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, come together. We do not know what these people called themselves because they left no written language. We can assume from what we know of other ancient people, however, that the word used for themselves was one which meant the people. We now call them Anasazi, from the Navajo word meaning the ancient ones. Which brings us to our first question of the day. Remember, when you're doing this on the assignment that'll be due Friday, the question won't be there, so you'll have to come back to this video. Question number 1. We now call them Anasazi, from the Navajo word meaning the ancient ones, the strong ones, the sleepy ones, or the people. And question number 2. The Anasazi were a highly developed group of people that lived in the area now called Chuck E. Cheese, Four Corners, California, or Europe. About 1 century ago, at a place now called Masa Verde, some cowboys found the first of a remarkable group of cliff dwellings in which people had lived about 100 years and then left, probably to join with the ancestors of the people now called the Pueblo Indians. There are cliff dwellings all over the southwest, but those at Mas Verde are some of the most spectacular. These ruins have fascinated everyone who has ever seen them, and while their builders left no written language, we have been able to learn a great deal about them. We now know that for centuries, people built their cliff dwellings. They lived on top of the tabletop mountain, which we know would be what kind of landform? It goes up steeply, then it's flat on top, and then goes down steeply. What was that called again? Don't know. Okay. Mas Verde was discovered by me, Mr. Beck. Aliens. Christopher Columbus, or cowboys. The first Anasazi settled in Mas Verde about 550 AD. They had been nomadic people, which means they went from place to place, but they chose this place to settle when they decided to practice farming rather than hunting and gathering as they had done before. They lived in pit houses, which they usually built into the top of the mesa, although a few of them were built into cliff recesses. These pit houses were probably the forerunners for the kivas built later, which we'll learn about later. Here, the people learned to make pottery and acquired the bow and arrow. Yes, the bow and arrow. Getting into some action here. Okay? We see a Anasazi pot on this slide. We see a drawing of a ancient Anasazi with his bow and arrow, and we see what is built nowadays by the ancestors of the Anasazi. This is not an actual house in the Anasazi that still stands, but cultures like to look back at their roots and build what their ancestors built, so there's an example of one. Okay, question number 4 already. Originally, the Anasazi were nomadic people, but they chose to settle in Mas Verde when they decided to have Thanksgiving, hunt and gather, build houses, or practice farming. This was a prosperous time for the people, and they grew in population. they began to build houses above ground, which had upright walls of poles and mud. These houses were built adjacent to each other in long, curving rows. And since that time, the people have been called pueblos, which means village dwellers in Spanish. By 1000 AD, the Anasazi were able to build houses of stone. The thick double walls often rose 2 or 3 stories high and were joined together in units. Makes me think of the modern day apartment complex. During this time, the Anasazi also began decorating their pottery with lovely geometric designs of black and white. Okay. Oh, question number 5. How did the Anasazi community in the photograph... how is the Anasazi community in the photograph like modern cities? I hope I was listening to what Mr. Beck said in the last slide. Advanced technology and natural resources, architecture and medicine, tall buildings and apartment-like structures. Or D, desert and rural environments. The population between 11,100 AD and 1300 AD may have numbered in the thousands. Round towers began to appear as a part of the dwellings, and all the crafts of pottery, stonework, weaving, jewelry making, and tool making grew in sophistication and artistry. The stone walls of the large pueblo built then are made of carefully shaped stones laid across in straight courses. For an unknown reason, the Anasazi began to move into the cliffs and recesses where their ancient ancestors had lived long before them. It may have been that they moved to the cliff dwellings for defense, or because they offered better protection from the elements. The reasons could even have been religious. Whatever the case, this era saw the beginning of a beautiful cliff dwellings, which we can now visit and wonder at today. Henry, have you been there? Not sure. There are many ruins atop of Mas Verde, but it is the site of the cliff dwellings which most excites visitors. The ruins of Mas Verde are elegantly beautiful. The builders were skillful, and their workmanship suggests a society which was both artistic and practical. They left behind not only their lovely, intricately fitted stone buildings, but evidence of an advanced skill in farming as well. The Anasazi themselves had obviously been the heirs of a vigorous group of ancestors who had used the centuries to learn and pass down the skills and traditions. So they became wonderful farmers in the desert, which is incredible. One of their biggest achievements. So here's some of the cliff dwellings as I continue to read. Most of the cliff dwellings in Mas Verde were built during the mid-1200s. In size, they range from houses with only 1 or 2 villages, which contain over 200 rooms and no standard floor plan. The walls were single course of stone, and some buildings were made of better quality than others. The Anasazi took advantage of what nature had given them by building their homes under overhanging cliffs, like seen in this picture, because the overhangs protected them from the weather. They certainly were easier to defend than villages built on flat land would have been. You had the high ground, Anakin. The homes were made of sandstone, which builders shaped into regular blocks about the size of a loaf of bread. They were then mortared together with a mixture of mud and water. The rooms averaged about 6 by 8 feet, though some rooms obviously intended for communal use, were much larger. Communal means a community was in there. Think of like religion. Separate rooms in the rear of the structure were used for storing food because they had a surplus because they were great farmers. When you have a surplus, you don't have to worry about food anymore, so you can begin specializing in other things like pottery and building houses, which the Anastasi obviously did. Okay, let's go into, here's another one, picture of it, different angle. Okay. We read that. And the next one. We're on to daily life. Much of the daily life of the people took place outside in open courtyards in front of buildings. We could tell by the artifacts that it was their women. It was that tell by the artifacts that it was there the women made pottery, while the men made knives, axes, and awls and scrapers from stone and bone. Smoke-darkened walls and ceilings still stand blackened by the fires needed to cook at all times of the year and needed for heat in the cold months of winter. Some of the walls were decorated, although most of the decoration was worn away over 700 years since the Anastasi lived there. Here and there can be seen original plasters, some of it covered with paintings. So here's some pictures of the tools that they had. We have a stone knife. We have some of the tools that they used. We have some of the pottery with that beautiful geometric design that was used. And here are some cave drawings. Okay, clothing. Clothing was basic and followed the seasons. Adults wore loincloths and sandals in the summer. That's why there's no pictures here. And in the winter, they wrapped themselves in animal hide and blankets and made of turkey feathers. Rabbit skins were used for clothing and winter footwear. The native yucca plant was useful for making sandals. And after the turkey was eaten, its bones were used for tools. The people were quite self-sufficient. At times, they had enough extra to exchange with other groups for goods they wanted. Seashells from the coast and turquoise, pottery and cotton from the south. An extensive network of trails found their way to many different faraway places, and traders carried goods from one place to another. We call this cultural diffusion. When we're trading with other groups, we're being inspired by other groups. One of the most important methods the archaeologists use to learn about the ancient people is by studying the garbage sites. Here, one can find scraps of food, broken pottery, and tools, and anything else that was no longer wanted and thrown down the slope in the front of the dwelling. These refuse heaps were also where the people buried their dead, probably because the ground was easier to dig than it was elsewhere. The Anastasi almost certainly lived in with several generations in the same household. Each family occupied a set of rooms, and when the family grew out of the rooms they added on new rooms to the ones they already had. Several families constituted a clan, and because many of the old families were maternal, the Mesa Verde clans probably were as well. Each clan would have its own kiva and rights to its own gardening plots atop the mesa. So, what happened to the Anastasi? This is one of the greatest mysteries in history. The Anastasi lived in the cliff houses for less than 100 years, and by 1300, Mesa Verde was deserted. Scientists know that the 25 years or so at the end of the century was a time of drought and crop failures. It could be that the people had to leave because the soil had been depleted due to extensive farming. So when you farm a land over and 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 over again, it becomes less fertile. So we add stuff like what? What do we add, Shane and Connor? Also, the wooded areas had been brought down for the use of buildings and for firewood. It was believed that when the Anastasi left, they traveled south to what is now New Mexico and Arizona, possibly to join and meld with other groups. Okay? Today's episode of What's Up with Mr. Beck was brought to you by Bosk. So, in this illustration, this shows a floor plan of a Masa Verde cliff dwelling named the Cliff Palace, one of the greatest tourist attractions in the area. This village was built into a huge cave on the side of a cliff which faces toward the east where the sun rises. The individual buildings are from 1 to 4 stories high, and visiting many of these ancient dwellings, one is amazed at how the people were able to adapt their living pattern to the natural environment. For example, some buildings have a kind of natural air conditioning system with vents for air circulation. The round structures were the kivas and were probably central rooms for a family or a clan. Think of it as like your living room. So all these little circle areas would be like the living rooms for those families. Okay, let's look at this picture. I like to see these patterns here. So we see this square etching would be 4 stories high. Now think about trying to build a 4-story high building without modern technology. These are really impressive things to do. Okay, so we see these are the 1 stories. We see the 2 stories going this way. Very incredible. Very, very incredible. One of the most sophisticated tribes of the ancient times. Okay, and this is the Cliff Palace now. So this was a drawing, and here is the actual Cliff Palace. Okay, all right. So that brings us to the end of our Anastasi. So I'm gonna hit you with the precept, and then we're gonna close the show off. So today's precept, hit it, Mr. Beck.
Today's precept is adversity is an opportunity for heroism. Marv Levy, and what he meant by that is when you face a challenge, he was a football coach, like you're down 20 points, there's a chance that you can become a hero, become remembered forever. One of his teams made the greatest comeback in NFL history, coming back over 20 points to win a game in the playoffs. I'm asking you, what are you going to overcome? How will you be a hero? Today's precept.
All right, guys, that's it for today's show. So I will be sending it. Make sure you finish all the items on your to-do list. There'll be a new assignment that I'm going to put up today. However, remember that your homework from Monday is due today by 8 p.m. Make sure you go back and watch What's Up with Mr. Beck so you can get the questions. Because if you don't, you're going to be like, oh, wait, I don't know what the questions are. Why did you do it like this, Mr. Beck? Go back to Monday's episode. It's that simple. Super easy. You can do it. Also, please send me some good news. My good news today was kind of skimpy. And even though you had like 3 days to give me good news, I need more good news. I love the videos. Keep sending them. I do have a backlog. So if I haven't got to yours yet, it's coming. I promise. Okay? I promise. So that's it for today's show. As always, hashtag choose kind. Hashtag stay awesome. Mr. Beck out.